Hello there, and welcome to today's episode of the Only Endometriosis podcast you need. Today I'm going to be talking about pelvic floors, and it's not necessarily going to be the message about pelvic floors that you would expect in a podcast or even in a discussion about pelvic floors. So today, if you are looking for advice on how to strengthen your pelvic floor and how to do Kegel exercises, all the rest of it, this is not the podcast episode for you. Today we are very much going to be talking about the exact opposite. So many women that I work with, endometriosis, adenomyosis, all of those conditions, polycystic ovaries, fibroids, difficult menopause transitions, struggle with fertility journeys. I would say between 80 and 85% of those women have pelvic floor issues, pelvic floor tightness, and I am including myself in this. And today I'm going to talk through, how you know if this is you, how you can tell if this is you. I'm going to talk about why it matters, and I'm going to give you some brief, generalized tips and advice on how you can start to release the tension in your abdomen, release the tension in your pelvic floor. So, why does this matter? Why does pelvic tension actually create issues? Our pelvis is so much more than a lot of us understand or a lot of us think it is. Our pelvic floor offers us obviously physical support, so it supports things like our bladder, our womb, obviously our bowel as well. Everything that's sitting within our abdomen is in some way supported by our pelvic floor. And it also provides us emotional safety as well. Our abdomens, our pelvic muscles hold some of the more vulnerable emotions that we have. So when our pelvic floor is functioning properly, it gives us that physical support and it gives us that emotional support as well. Now, when I talk about functioning properly, again, this is a sort of a societal issue, but we seem to value muscles being strong and tight over muscles functioning properly. And there are two very distinct things here. There is a difference between a strong muscle and a properly functioning muscle. You can have a muscle that functions perfectly well and it is untoned. I wouldn't say it's not strong, it needs a level of strength, but a functioning muscle isn't necessarily a particularly defined or a particular strong muscle. Conversely, you can have a massively strong muscle, a massively toned muscle that is not functioning properly, and that's actually when issues start to happen. So the example I give, and I have no idea if this is going to work well on a podcast or not, but the example I always give when I'm talking to somebody is the example of your index finger. So if you can just imagine what I'm doing, you can even try and do it along with me if you like, but just pop your index finger up as if you're pointing at the sky. And I'm just bending my finger so it's almost at right angles. And what's going on there, and apologies if you're sort of in any way attuned to the physical body. This is basic anatomy, and I'm probably going to make a hash of explaining it. But an index finger bent at right angles, you have various muscles at play here. So you have all of these muscles that need to be functioning correctly. You have the muscles on the knuckle side of your finger that need to be relaxing and releasing. And you have the muscles on the underside of your finger that need to be tightening. So in order for any movement of our body to happen correctly, to happen with ease, with flow, we need to have all of those muscles functioning properly. The ones that need to release, and the ones that need to contract, need to contract. If one of them doesn't function properly, then the other muscles around them will be overworking. Or will be working in a different way. So when you're compensating things like if you have a sore knee, if you have a damaged ankle, let's say, and you walk slightly differently for a couple of weeks, you will start to notice aches and pains in probably either the opposite hip or your lower back, possibly even the opposite shoulder. That deferred pain, that's because that reaction, that action of a muscle that isn't functioning properly has adverse reactions elsewhere. This is exactly the same when we come to our pelvic floor. So what we want that pelvic floor to do is not necessarily to be strong. It doesn't need to be particularly tight. It doesn't need to be particularly toned. What it does need to be doing is functioning properly. So when we want it to relax, we need it to relax. When we want it to tense, we need it to tense. And when I say it, the pelvic floor is obviously made up of different muscles. It isn't just one thing. So we want some muscles to be contracting, others to releasing. When we have all of the muscles tight, if you can imagine that finger, if you pop your finger up again, you don't have to do that. But if you can imagine your finger pointing straight up, if you want to bend that knuckle at right angles, if you can try and do that and tense, I don't know how easy it is to tense your finger, but if you could try and tense all of the muscles in your finger and then try and bend it at 90 degrees, it's actually really, really difficult, because what we want to do is to have 50% of those muscles relaxing. Don't do it too much because it actually hurts. Or it does me anyway. So when you've got that muscle tension, it's actually really, really difficult for your body to function properly. So if you think back to what is held in that safe cocoon of our pelvis, we have our bladder, we have our bowel, we have our womb. If we have too much tension in our pelvic floor, so in those muscles that constitute our pelvic floor, we are then seeing a reaction in all of those things. So we see a reaction in our bladder, we see a reaction in our bowel, we see a reaction in our womb. From a Chinese medicine perspective, from an alternative medicine perspective, what that's doing is creating blockages. So that tension means that we're not allowing blood, qi, water to flow adequately through our abdomen, through our pelvis. It's also creating pain. My finger, in fact, I feel like I've actually strained a muscle in my finger doing that exercise, but I'm still experiencing pain now. So if you can imagine, again, just sort of transpose that to your pelvis. If all of those muscles in your pelvis are tight and they're tightening when they should be relaxing, you're straining all the other muscles as well around that area. So it can lead to so many issues. When we talk about blockages, just if you haven't listened to any of my podcasts, or if you're new to alternative medicine, Chinese medicine, when we talk about blockages, when we talk about restricting blood flow, when we talk about restricting energy, that's when we start to see stagnation. That's when we start to see pain, obviously, but also things like bleeding, clotting, inflammation, all of those kind of issues, toxicity buildup, all of those things that we start to see with endometriosis and related conditions. It's also connected to our nervous system and our breath and our posture. So you know when your pelvis is playing up, if everything is really, really tight, then you do struggle. Well, I'll speak for myself. I don't want to project things onto anybody else. I know that when my pelvis is tight, when the muscles in my pelvis that should be relaxed are tight, and the muscles that should be tight or even tighter, I do struggle to stand up straight. And there's been some days, especially when I've had flare-ups in the past, where I have been unable to stand up straight for maybe, I don't know, a few days even. And that's because the muscles that should be relaxing, think back to that finger, the muscles that should be relaxing to enable us to straighten up are actually too tight. So we're kind of, our body's fighting itself. We haven't got that flow. We haven't got that ebb and flow balance. Everything is tight. Everything is resisting. When we breathe, for those of you who have done breath work before, for those of you who have been to my rest and reset sessions, we do a lot of breath work. Sorry, that was my postman. We do a lot of breath work. And in order to breathe therapeutically, we need to be breathing down into our abdomen. If our abdominal muscles are too tight, if our pelvic floor is too tight, then that does restrict the ability to breathe down deep into our tummies. So we stick at this upper breath, we stick at this shallow breathing, we stick at the fight or flight breathing. And the shallower our breath, the more anxiety we feel. So again, the better, in inverted commas, the higher functioning our pelvic floor is, that balance between tension and relaxation, the easier it is for us to breathe into our abdomens, the easier it is for us to release tension. And again, we have so many important nerves and important muscles running through our pelvic floor, part of our pelvic floor running through our abdomen, that heightened tension, again, our bodies, our minds are intrinsically linked. Our minds believe everything our body's telling us. Our bodies believe everything our mind's telling us. So if your body is tightening, if your body is effectively in fight or flight, it's telling your mind that there's something to worry about. So in order to relax our nervous system, in order to get that deep sense of relaxation that our body needs, that our body starts to crave, we need to be relaxing deep into our core. Like I say, our pelvic floor actually holds some of our most vulnerable emotions. So if you've experienced trauma, if you've experienced surgery, which is one of my main, I don't know what the word is, frustrations, I suppose, with endometriosis surgery. When you have the trauma of surgery, that trauma sits in our abdomen. So quite often what can happen is we have the surgical scars, the physical scars, as well as the traumatic energetic scars, all sitting deep within our pelvic floor, all sitting deep within our wombs, within our abdomens. We experience stress in our abdomens, in our pelvic floor muscles. One of the first things that tightens up is our psoas muscles, which are two massive muscles that run through our pelvis. And it's the muscles that connect. I know some of you will have been sick of hearing about me talk about the psoas muscles, but the psoas muscles connect essentially the top of the body to the bottom of the body. And they are the muscles that tighten when we are stressed. They're the muscles that get us ready to fight or flight. And they're probably the most overlooked muscles in our body, yet they probably are two of the most powerful muscles in our body as well. But when we're in fight or flight, our psoas muscles are really tight. If we spend a lot of time sitting down during the day, our psoas muscles tend to be the muscles that tighten up. And what we want those muscles to be is strong and tight when we need them to be strong and tight, strong, relaxed when we need them to be relaxed. We need them to be functioning properly. So all of this stuff is held in our tummies, all of this stuff is held in our abdomens, all of this stuff is completely controllable. But that is the flip side. What I'd like, if I could instill anything from this podcast, is that we as women, as humans as well, but we as women need to let go of that sense of control over our pelvic floor muscles. So if you've worked with me before, you might find this a little easier than if you're new to all of this. Well, you definitely will. But there's a very subtle but powerful shift that can be so empowering when it comes to our pelvic floor, and that is that shift from control to connection. If you can view your relationship with your pelvic floor as one of connection rather than trying to control it, this journey becomes a heck of a lot easier. So what we're wanting to do is connect to our pelvic floor. We want to feel the tension. We want to control it in a way because we want to be able to relax it when we want to relax it. We want to tighten it when we want to tighten it. But it's actually about connection. It's actually about feeling how your pelvic floor responds to different emotions, responds to different physical exercise, responds to different seating patterns, different release work. It's all about that connection. Once you shift from connection to trying to control, you're kind of half the way there. We need to let go of this idea that a tight pelvic floor, even a tight muscle, but a tight pelvic floor, a tight abdominal muscle is a healthy abdominal muscle, because actually an abdominal muscle, a pelvic floor muscle that's functioning correctly, is tight for some of the time when it needs to be tight, and it's released and relaxed for the rest of the time. So how do you know if your pelvic floor muscle is too tight? So a lot of these symptoms are actually the similar symptoms to if your pelvic floor is not tight enough, so if it's not functioning properly in the other way. And you may have actually been told that you need to strengthen your pelvic floor. You might have been sent to a pelvic floor physio, you might be sent to a pelvic floor specialist who tries to tighten your pelvic floor. That's my key thing as well. I worked with a fabulous client last year. In fact, she might be listening. Hi, if you're listening, you will know who you are. Who had a lovely pelvic floor specialist, pelvic floor physio. But the physio didn't understand endometriosis and didn't understand necessarily. I'm probably doing a disservice. I never met her, never talked to her. She seemed lovely, but didn't necessarily understand the power and the ways to release an overly heightened and overly stimulated pelvic floor. So my key tip in this regard is to find, if you're looking for a pelvic floor expert, it's to find a pelvic floor expert who gets endometriosis and who gets what an overly tightened, chronically tightened pelvic floor needs in order to release it properly. So, slight aside there. Signs that your pelvic floor might be just asking for a little bit more TLC. It might be asking for a little bit more release than we're currently giving it. So do you feel any heaviness, any pressure in your pelvis? So that can feel downward pressure. Sometimes it feels like upward pressure. Sometimes it feels like so I used to describe it as somebody's got a coat hanger and is just twisting that coat hanger. That kind of almost unbearable tension, pressure feeling in your pelvis. So this is conversely, so sometimes in terms of the impact on your bladder, it can actually be quite counterintuitive. So quite often what can happen if you have a tight pelvic floor, when you laugh or you sneeze or you jump up and down or you try running, it can actually leak. Your bladder can leak, which is why sometimes it's mistaken for too loose a pelvic floor, which is why sometimes we're told that we need to tighten it. But actually what's happening is your muscles and your soft tissue around your bladder are so tight that it's not almost, your resilience within your bladder has gone. So there's no space for any more movement. So as soon as you squeeze your bladder, it leaks a little bit. So it's not actually loose. It's not that your pelvic floor needs tightening. It's that you need to release the grip on your bladder almost. So a lot of the time I see recurring, I was going to say STIs, that's not what I mean, recurring UTIs, that's the word. And again, actually, I've said STIs and I'm having a bit of a laugh, but actually quite often it can be misdiagnosed as well as STIs, when actually it's more to do with the pelvic tightness, it's the tightness of the muscles. But yeah, UTIs, recurring UTIs, feeling like you need to go to the toilet and then definitely having to go to the toilet within a split second of feeling that you need to go to the toilet. Again, that's a lack of resilience. That's a lack of space in your bladder. You can have trouble going to the toilet as well sometimes, even with weeing, so you can get little bits of blood. It can feel quite stingy. You can feel quite dehydrated, even if you're not dehydrated. These are all some of the symptoms that your pelvic floor, some of them are that the pelvic floor is too loose, but sometimes it's the symptoms that your pelvic floor is too tight. Painful sex, painful periods, pain if you are trying to relax. So if your body's going to sleep and you're getting pelvic pain, that can also be a sign that your pelvis is too tight, because as with any muscle, if it's too tight, if there's a strain there and you try and relax it, it's actually quite painful until it gets used to that relaxation state. Moving on to your bowel, so do you have issues like constipation? Do you have IBS type symptoms? Do you have trouble going to the toilet? Is it often quite painful? That can be, again, a sign that you're dehydrated, but if you're not dehydrated, it can be a sign of that innate tension in and around your pelvis. And this is a really, really common one, but it's actually really, really difficult to identify as well. Do you have an emotional disconnection from your womb, from your lower body, from your abdomen? Quite often when I'm talking about this and I start talking about abdominal massage, there's kind of a light goes on in people's eyes, because when I say to people, have you ever had a tummy massage? They're like, oh no, why would you have a tummy massage? We don't think about that area of our body as something that needs nurturing, as something that needs that connection. If you have a bad back, if you have a muscle tension in your back, then you don't think anything about going for a back massage. If the thought of a stomach massage kind of creeps you out a little bit, if I ask you how connected you are to your womb, what are the words that come to mind when I ask you about your pelvic floor and about your womb, and your everything down there, your ovaries? If that's negative, or if that's nothing at all, then that's a sign that you're struggling with pelvic tension. And I know it's a bit of a leap for a lot of people, but actually, again, I bring you back to that mindset shift from control to connection. It's almost about feminizing or re-feminizing your relationship with your pelvis. So rather than that kind of masculine strength, control and power, soften that approach to your pelvis. We want to soften the pelvis, so we soften the approach to your pelvis. So if you can start to reconnect to it, talk to it beautifully. And I know for some people this sounds really, really strange, but tell your pelvis that you love your pelvis. Tell your womb that you love your womb. Put your hands on your pelvis. Fall asleep connecting your hands to your pelvic area. Feel the warmth from your hands and feel that warmth deep down into your abdomen, into your pelvis. If you start to reconnect, if you start to soften that relationship and that message that you are completely disconnected, that you want it to be strong and powerful, and soften that message that you just want it to work, you want to love it, you want to nurture it, you need it to release whatever it's holding. That's massively powerful and empowering as well. So there's some of the symptoms, there's some of the things that you will experience if you are experiencing these pelvic issues. So if you want to reconnect even deeper, like I say, hand on your tummy, put one hand on your heart center as well. That just has a beautiful sort of cyclical ritual to it. Deep abdominal breath work. So if you breathe into the hand that's on your tummy, try and direct your breath. It will be really, really difficult if you're not used to breathing like this. If you are holding all of that tension in your pelvis, then it's not always the easiest thing to do. But if you can do that, it's really, really, really beneficial. It relaxes muscle, it relaxes soft tissue, it breathes air down into your abdomen, it breathes chi, it breathes energy and brings blood flow into your abdomen. All of those things are essential if we're going to be having a healthy pelvis, a healthy womb, a healthy system. Gentle movement. Gentle yoga poses. So some of the, not necessarily some of the strengthening yoga, some of the sort of the more attacking yoga. That's not the right phrase to use, but you know what I mean. So if you go for a more gentle form of yoga, having yoga poses that release and relax, really, really beneficial. Somatic releases, so things like just standing, just put some music on and just sway your hips. Just move your hips in whatever way you can, circular, figure of eight, however it feels good. Just move the abdomen slowly, quickly, it doesn't matter, just as long as you're getting some movement through there. Mindful walking. So again, if you so sometimes I used to be a runner. I say used to, I still am a runner, but I'm not a runner like I used to be. I used to be all about the personal best. I used to be about going further, going faster. As I've got older, which is an awful thing to say, and I promised myself I'd never think like this, but as I've got older, my approach to most things has softened, and running included. So now I don't go running 5 times a week. I go running maybe 2 or 3 times a week, and I try and do the rest of the time doing walking. I've also softened how I walk. So I never used to be able to go for a walk. I had to be walking with a purpose. So I had to be walking to the shop, or I had to be walking to work. I don't think I ever just went for a walk. If I was going out like that, I would go for a run. Now I go walking, and I've softened my approach to walking as well. So it's not about getting the heart rate up. It's not about, I was going to say it's not about looking at the smartwatch, but I do still take my smartwatch because steps do count. But it's not about looking at distance travelled. It's not about looking at my pace or my cadence. It's literally now about enjoying the weather. A beautiful, slow, mindful walk. You're still getting energy, you're still using energy. So for those of you who are sort of calorie conscious, if you're training, it's still beneficial. But what it's more beneficial for is releasing your pelvic floor. Because mindful walking, slowing down your walking, still gives you that movement, that energy, that it's obviously not at the same heightened energy release, but you're still expending calories. But what you're doing is more gently releasing your pelvic floor. So you're stimulating your bowel more gently. The more gentle the movements we do, the more lasting the results are, which I know is is kind of counterintuitive to what we're told when we're doing things like gym work. We're told to do heavier and heavier and heavier. What we're wanting to do, I suppose it does make sense, because when we're going to the gym, we're wanting our muscles to tighten, we're wanting our muscles to strengthen. What we're wanting to do in this instance is relax and release. So we're looking to more gentle exercises. We still want to get exercising, we still want to get that blood flow, that energy flow, that oxygen flow. We still need to be moving, but what we want to be doing is doing it in a gentle way, because we don't necessarily want to be strengthening the muscles. We want to be encouraging them to release and relax. And talk to a pelvic floor expert, like I say. Have a look at pelvic floor drops, not necessarily pelvic floor lifts, but pelvic floor drops. What you want to do is engage your muscles and release your muscles, not just strengthening and engaging. So, I said I was going to go through some journal prompts. So if you do journal, then these are really nice ways to just explore that relationship between your pelvic floor and the tension, stress, anxiety, and all the rest of it. So I've got 4 journal prompts here. So if you do journal, just build 1 or 2 into these every couple of days or whenever you're minded to. So the first one, just to ask yourself, and like I say, if you don't journal, then just a brief moment of reflection on each of these points will do wonders. So the first question for you is, when is the last time you truly listened to what your body was feeling below the waist? So we talk about headaches, we talk about lower backs, we talk about pain in our abdomen, but when did you actually listen to what your body was feeling and telling you? What emotions do you associate with your womb or your pelvis? So that was what I was saying before. What's the words that come up? Are they negative? Are there any that you've been holding on to that you don't understand why you feel that way? Just explore the emotions and why you feel them, and can you shift them? How would it feel to feel safe in your body again? And what might support that? What actions can you do to bring that feeling of safety back to your body? And then just pledge, I like that word, just pledge to yourself just to do one small thing, just to show tenderness to your pelvis today. So hopefully that'll help. I hope that brings some sort of aha moment or some sort of relief if you are struggling with this kind of thing. The one thing I'd say that I haven't actually said yet, which is probably the most important part of this podcast, is if you struggle with pelvic tension, then no amount of physical work alone is going to release that pelvic tension, because it is so intrinsically linked to our emotions. So if you're somebody who, like this fabulous, I had 2 clients last year. Well, actually, one was the year before, but I had 2 clients recently that struggled with very, very similar things, and one was a fertility client, and one wasn't. Both similar previous journeys. If you are struggling to release this pelvic tension, then just doing the physio work, just doing the gym work, just doing whatever it is, the exercises on your pelvis, you might see relief for maybe a day, maybe a couple of days, but unless you do the emotional work as well, those muscles will keep falling back into that tense position, because muscle memory is really, really powerful. Again, think about the gym. If we're training for something, in the days when I was running, when I was training for marathons, I never did a marathon. When I was training for half marathons or 10Ks or whatever, muscle memory was fabulous. It meant that I could have a few days off and then I'd go back to running and my body would be like, oh yeah, I know what you're doing here, let me help you. So the muscle memory would kick in and everything felt really, really easy. When you try to reprogram muscle memory, that's when it gets tough, because that muscle memory is really, really powerful. It's exactly the same in our pelvis. So if your pelvis is used to being tight, if it's used to having that tension, that strength in inverted commas there, that as soon as you start to release it physically, it will feel a bit odd, exactly the same as it does in the gym, but it will want to start to go back to what it sees as its normal, that tense position. If you don't do the emotional release work, then those emotions are going to make it go back to that tense position even sooner. So it'll just almost in effect ping back into place. If you couple the physical releases with emotional release, you'll see a lot longer lasting results. It's a lot harder, because emotional release work isn't always easy. There's a lot of self-exploration. I wouldn't advocate doing it completely by yourself unless you are, excuse the French. I don't know why I say excuse the French. It's not a French word, is it? But unless you're shit hot at self-healing, unless you're shit hot at self-care and deep self, what's the word I'm looking for? Self-care. Just stick with that. It's not what I mean, like self-healing techniques. Then I wouldn't necessarily recommend complete deep emotional release by yourself. I would say I'm shit hot at all these and I need external help to release emotions. It isn't always that easy, but there are stuff, those journals, Reiki, breathwork, all the techniques that I've given you in this podcast. There's tons of others as well, but there are stuff you can do yourself. But if you need some really deep emotional release work, then I would advise finding somebody who can help you with that. You are not alone. There are so many women who are struggling with these things. Men as well. I don't know why I always say women. Well, I do because I'm a women's health expert, but there's so many people. We carry so much of our past trauma, so much of our emotions in our abdomen, and releasing them isn't easy. But you don't have to do it alone. There are me out there. There's people like me out there. Acupuncture, reflexology, all of those kind of stuff can really, really help. So do try different therapies, different remedies to help as well. If you would like to work with me, then check out the website. There are free stuff, there's low cost stuff, there's higher cost stuff as well on there. So just have a look and see if you can find something that speaks to you. Like I say, it doesn't have to be me. There's tons of people like me out there. So yes, I hope that this podcast has helped. I hope it's been a gentle reintroduction, a reconnection to your pelvic floor, to one of the most important and powerful parts of your body. Give it some love, give it some nourishment. Try, if you can, to shift from control to reconnection, connection, and just see how that impacts on all your symptoms. And as ever, I'd be delighted to hear if you try any of these things and they work. Please do let me know. Until next time.